In 1873, wargaming had a problem. Kriegspiel, as it was called by its Prussian inventors, had become so complex that hardly anybody played it. The game was originally designed as a training tool for young officers, but at this point, finding senior officers with battlefield experience willing to put in the time to learn the rules and referee the game had become nearly impossible. Lieutenant Wilhelm Jacob Meckel was dissatisfied with the situation and identified a number of problems with the game as it stood. First of all, the rules of the game limited the referee. A referee in Kriegspiel was expected to be an experienced battlefield officer, whose job was to take the orders sent to him by the players and then translate that into action on the game battlefield. However, the strictness of the rules of the game often prevented them from using that real-world experience in determining the results. Secondly, he pointed out that the rules of the game could not, even in theory, accurately model the conditions of a real battlefield. The world is infinitely complex and cannot be reduced down to just a series of rules. Players would always be trying things that were outside of the rules, and situations would be cropping up that the rules didn't cover. Thirdly, the detailed calculations that the game required were often tedious, they slowed the game down, and they didn't make that much of a difference anyway. Occasionally, you would run into these absurd situations where the playing of the Kriegspiel, the war game, would take longer than fighting the actual battle in real life. To resolve this, Meckel proposed eliminating most of the rules of the game and instead relying much more heavily on the battlefield experience of the referee. Rather than consulting a lot of charts and graphs to resolve a situation, the referee would examine what was going on, make a quick ruling based on what they thought was the most likely outcome, and the game would quickly move on from there. So this would make the game a lot faster, it would make it a lot more accessible, and hopefully make it more realistic as well. This form of wargaming became known as free Kriegspiel, as opposed to the older version which became known as rigid Kriegspiel. All of this is relevant to Dungeons & Dragons because there is a similar movement brewing in RPG spaces right now. It's at times been called ancient school role-playing or Arnesonian style, based on the play style of Dave Arneson, who invented the first fantasy role-playing game. But more recently, it's been called Free Kriegspiel Renaissance or Free Kriegspiel Revival. In these FKR role-playing games, immersion and minimalism reign supreme. So a character sheet can be as simple as just a few lines of description, plus maybe a list of equipment, and players often don't need to know many or any of the rules at all. They simply describe what they want to do to the DM, and the DM tells them results using any rules that they want to use, or perhaps just their best judgment. You can think of it as a kind of fork of the OSR, but with even less of a loyalty to the rules of early Dungeons & Dragons. Like the OSR, the FKR movement doesn't have one single definition, but more of a cluster of related principles and priorities. So one of the really big ones is that it focuses strongly on encouraging players to interact directly with the campaign world without the intermediary of rules or abilities on your character sheet in the way. This is one of the reasons why players don't need to know much or any of the rules. The refrain you hear in a lot of FKR circles is, play worlds, not rules. When David Wesley or Dave Arneson were running one of their fantasy campaigns in this style, they weren't running a set of rules. They were running a place, Bronstein or Blackmore, respectively. If you were a player, all you had to do was imagine that you were there and then act accordingly. The FKR also frequently encourages diegetic character progression. So what that would mean is that instead of character advancement coming from abstract experience points, it's done in a very concrete way. So if you want to get more powerful, you collect more magic items, you find powerful NPCs to ally yourself to, you build a stronghold, you get more powerful in the world rather than through this, artificial layer put on top of the game. Do you want to become more powerful and influential? Then figure out how you would do that in the real world and then do that in the game. Now, despite its minimalistic tendencies, an FKR game isn't really rules-free. Rather, rules are just seen as a kind of tool that the DM can take up and then set aside when they don't need them anymore, rather than as a strict set of procedures that they have to follow. It's the game world that's really the focus of any campaign. Opposed 2d6 rolls are pretty common, mostly because those dice are just easy to find and there's a nice bell curve there, but there's no necessary reason that you have to use that. You could easily use a d20, 1d6, you could use a dice pool, or really whatever you wanted. When an uncertain situation comes up, the game master would simply decide what dice are going to be used, how they're going to be modified, they would resolve the situation, and then move on. The point is that rules are used as the situation calls for them, and serve the unique needs of that campaign and the people playing. You could say that the FKR uses a table-centric philosophy of design. You can see the OSR principle of rulings, not rules, at work here, but it's taken even further than what you typically see in the OSR. Because even OSR games often have particular procedures that they use pretty consistently in certain situations, whereas in FKR, that wouldn't necessarily be the case. Wait, but as the DM, I like having those rules and that structure in place. Running an FKR game is not for everybody. It simultaneously demands far more and far less than what you would usually see in a role-playing game. On the one hand, you no longer have to master complex rules, keep track of encounter balance, teach players how to play, or any of that. But on the other hand, you're required to have a strong sense of the internal logic of a game world. You're required to have enough of a sense of game design that you can improvise rules on the fly. You got to be able to think on your feet, make rulings consistently, and that's not easy for everybody. But without printed rules, how do I know that the GM is playing fair? FKR is a high-trust playstyle. It requires that everyone at the table trust the GM to be knowledgeable, even-handed, and invested in everyone at the table enjoying the game. If that's not true for the group that you're playing in, FKR just isn't going to work. But a game with more fully fleshed out, well-rounded rules makes the world more realistic. One of the goals of playing in an FKR style is to increase realism, not decrease it. As Meckel pointed out more than 100 years before Dungeons & Dragons, no rule system can cover a system as complex as a complete world. So FKR replaces all of that with a human being who can make judgment calls that match human intuition. This prevents rules from creating absurd situations, and it covers all the edge cases that rules can't. But as a player, the rules remind me of what my character can do and how to do it. There's a real trade-off here. Strict rules for players allow them to overcome challenges using a kind of chess-like tactical sense, which a lot of people really enjoy, but FKR just throws that out the window. By not giving players a lot of rules, they're forced to engage with the world without using the lens of their character sheet. They have to deal with each situation as it is and come up with out-of-the-box strategies. Some people really like that, some people don't. In the end, the FKR style exists at the extreme end of one spectrum and just isn't going to be for everybody. Like anything else in RPGs, there's going to be trade-offs when you adopt one approach over another. Even I don't run games in a full FKR style, although I have adopted some elements of it in my games. If you're interested in learning more about this style of play, I would check out the free Kriegspiel Revolution Discord channel. I'll put a link to that in the description below. They're really friendly and they'll answer a lot of questions for you. I would also check out John Peterson's masterwork, Playing at the World, if you want to learn more about these early fantasy campaigns that were played in this style. I would also check out the documentary Secrets of Blackmoor if you want to see a lot of interviews with the people who played with Dave Arneson and who first experienced this kind of fantasy role-playing. All right, everyone, that's it for today. Remember to hit the like, subscribe, and bell icons if you want to be notified when Questing Beast releases new videos. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.